I'm Farah, and I am the Events and Network Coordinator at Julie's Bicycle, which is a charity working at the intersection of art and the environment. A lot of the work that I do is about creating space for marginalized communities and creatives to open up our understanding of climate change, to go beyond data and stats and explore the things that art really does best, which is the human side of climate injustice. So thank you to everyone who's joining us today. So just a little bit of a run through of what we'll do today. We'll do a brief summary of climate justice and why it's important to discuss and what it is. We'll share some examples of creative practice and people working on climate justice. We'll talk to our guest, Crested Collective, and we'll round off with a little activity that will happen in some breakout rooms. So if you need captioning, please let us know, and we'll leave you here in the main room. And we'll get to that a bit later. So first of all, it would be good to get a sense of who's here and what's been happening with you in the webinar room. So I've got a quick little question for you, and you should be able to see some reactions, a little reactions icon at the bottom. So just give a little wave as I sort of go through this question. So during the pandemic, I've got three sort of options for you. I felt more connected to others around the world as part of a creative climate movement. I felt more isolated or alone in my climate and environmental work, or neither. The pandemic hasn't really affected how connected I feel to others working on climate and environmental issues. So if you just show this. Great, so it's quite evenly split so far. We've got a few more people doing the votes. Great, so we've got 42% of people who say that they feel more connected to others around the world as part of a creative climate movement, which is great. But we've got 21% of people who say they feel more isolated or alone in their climate and environmental work, and 36% of people who say it hasn't really affected how they have been working. So it's interesting to get to know what people are feeling in the room. So let's get started. What is climate justice? So we have to really begin with understanding the history of climate change in order to understand climate justice. The British Empire and European empires were hugely important in the development of climate change. This is a map in the top left corner of the screen of every country which was colonized by Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, and you can see it's pretty much most of the world. Land was stolen, fossil fuels were extracted, minerals were stolen, food was stolen. This is what led to chattel slavery, and this is what our whole banking system and many of our institutions now are built on. And this is what has led to industrialization and yes, our systems, and we see those impacts continue today. So we have images here from the tar sands in Alberta in Canada. We have coal mining happening in China. We have the destruction of rainforests in Borneo. And these are some of the impacts that we're still witnessing. Okay, sorry for this. So I've used aviation as an example here of the inequalities in consumption that continue today. So we've seen through the COVID pandemic that airlines have been bailed out, for example, without any climate caveats. but we can see that it's just a small percentage of people who are contributing the highest amount of emissions here. So that's 62% of emissions from the high income countries. So it's 16% of the population are creating 62% of emissions. And it's not just aviation, we can see that in agriculture, we see it in fashion. So in fashion, about 30% of clothing in UK wardrobes hasn't been worn for at least a year. Up to 350,000 tons of used clothing goes to landfill in the UK every year. And fashion is one of the most polluting industries that we see globally. So the impacts of that are felt throughout the world, and it is not the highest consumers who bear the brunt of climate impacts. And this is really the crux of climate justice. The people who contribute the least are the ones who feel the worst impacts and who feel it first. So when we talk about climate change as being in the future, for many people it is the past, it is the present, it is not the future. So for example, the average person living in sub-Saharan Africa produced in 2014 around 0.8 metric tons of CO2, which compares to about 6.4% for the average European and around 16.5 metric tons for the average American. So that's 20 times more than someone in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet we see locust swarms, we're seeing increased weather events, we're seeing fires which are ravaging communities, we're seeing increases in pollution. So this is something that continues and is all connected back to those bigger systems of extraction and of fossil fuel extraction and of land theft. And it's not just around the world. We see those inequalities in climate impacts manifest in the UK too. So in London, so Black people make up 15.3% of people exposed to illegal levels of nitrous oxide, but make up 13.3% of the population. And this image is of Ella Kissy Deborah, who was a young girl who is potentially the first person in the UK to have air pollution listed as her cause of death on her death certificate. She died because of complications from asthma because of the illegal levels of air pollution on the roads where she lived. And on a personal note, that's down the road from my house, and you can still see it. I live in the area of the highest air pollution area in Lewisham in the southeast. And this also maps across to deprivation stats. So areas of higher deprivation tend to be more diverse and tend to also feel more of the effects of air pollution. And this also links to what we're seeing in the pandemic as well. So the people who are living in those more deprived areas are doubly impacted. So, oops. And again, we have to think about this as a systemic issue. So it's not just about individual actions or individual impacts, because our whole systems are set up and still profit from and invest heavily in fossil fuels. We personally might be contributing through things like our pensions and other investments. So you know, our money is the biggest sort of thing that's always the hardest to get over, but it's also we are still in the UK contributing huge amounts to the climate crisis through funding it. So how can art work towards climate justice? And there's a few examples here. I'm going to start with a little example from, ooh, laptop's having a moment, great. Okay, well, we'll start here. So this is the color green, and I'm going to start by tooting my own horn here. So this is a program that we did, and this is part of our Arts Council England program at Julie's Bicycle. We developed a series of podcasts which were in conversation with artists and creative practitioners of color who are engaged in climate and environmental work. Part of the reason for doing this is one of the pillars of climate justice is allowing people who are most impacted to speak from their own perspective. And in the UK, that means people of colour, people from working class backgrounds, people who are disabled. And so we really wanted to make sure that we're talking about the diversity of perspectives that can be offered and should be included, and not just included, but leading the climate movement here. So we released 6 episodes last year, and we are working on a few more things, so keep your eyes peeled very soon. This is another really great example from Ron White, who works for an organization in Philadelphia called Trash Academy. And the great thing about this is that part of the reason why climate injustice persists and we don't have these conversations so openly is because it's incredibly opaque. But what we've seen, and this is a piece of work that Ron produced with young people who he works with through Trash Academy, and they looked at this simple everyday object of a toilet paper, a pack of toilet paper. And so what you see is all of the connections along the supply chain, along the waste process, along how sewage moves through systems, and how water moves through systems, and inefficiencies and inequalities that create not just the CO2 impact of this singular item, but throughout the whole supply chain. And I think that opening up those roots and those connections is really important to help us understand how this inequality persists and how we work towards justice. So this is another piece of work from Angela Chan, who is a curator of worm art and ecology. So she is a fantastic curator who has been working on looking at or creating a visual cultures library. So this was part of a program that she did for Mama Rotterdam. And what it was about was bringing together artists who are from marginalized communities and creating a whole space within this exhibition, but also then creating this library of further resources. So the art didn't just stay in that gallery space, but then became accessible and created much more conversation around that. And what Angela is really great at doing was then she brought all of that research work and all of that curatorial work to some youth groups back in the UK, and she has created this other work, Changing Our Planet, Changing Our Minds, alongside young people. So empowering them to really understand the whole, the totality of climate justice as well. And that accessibility is a really important pillar of what climate justice should be. So it's bringing it through, not just something that's not just happening in a gallery space, but bringing it through to our everyday lives as well. And that links back to the toilet paper implosion that Ron did, which was fantastic. Okay. So this is a great project from a gallery in rural Scotland called Timespan. And so what Timespan did was they had done this whole project on digitizing their local landscape. But through digitizing were able to explore the history of that landscape and the changes that had occurred because of the links to Scotland's links to the slave trade, and how that created fishing ports along the Highlands, for example, which produced all the food that was shipped off to the slave plantations in the Caribbean. And this is a really important way of bringing those histories to life as well, and connecting them to what we see around us and the ways in which we conceive of nature and the landscape around us, because landscape is not apolitical. It has been created still in our imaginations as well as in reality. And this is another fantastic project from a group called Interpret, who are a research group, and they use geospatial mapping techniques to map out environmental injustices and environmental crimes. And they have been working to support the campaign to have ecocide recognized as a crime in the court. So they're using these geospatial maps, and they are able to show where corporations have been illegally extracting and yes, where organizations have been illegally extractive, and using that to build a body of evidence towards this ecocide process. So there's we'll keep moving on through, but those are just a small group of examples for climate projects which address injustice very directly, which open up the space for people to speak who might not be usually part of the environmental movement, and who also make that accessible then for others to be able to participate in that conversation. And those are really the three things which I think are very important and the important pillars for climate justice. Okay. I have just been told that our guest, Chloe, is suddenly unavailable. So what we will do is we will go into a little activity. No, we won't. We will. Let's swap this around. Let's do some Q&A. So if anybody has any questions at this point, we can look at those, and if there aren't any, we'll go to our task. Got any through? No. Okay, we can come back to some questions and answers at the end. What we'll do now is we'll go into some breakout sessions, and what I would like for everyone to discuss in your groups is what you think the top 5 principles of working towards climate justice should be as creative practitioners. If you had a wish list or a sort of climate justice rider that you were taking to an organization or an artist that you were working with, what would those principles be? What would make up that manifesto of climate justice for you? So we'll split you off into breakout groups in a second. If you would like to use the captioning function, then please cancel the invitation once it pops up for you, and that will keep you in the main room, so you'll still be able to access the captioning. Okay, great. So over to you, Days, to split those groups up. So those of you who are left, would you like to unmute yourselves and we can have, we can go through that little conversation. Who have we got here? So we've got Callie and Britt still here. And hi, Alison.
Hi.
And we have Nancy here too. No? Hi, for those of you who've just joined us, you've caught us in the middle of an interactive session happening in breakout rooms. So we'll be able to get back to that in, people will be coming back into the room in 5 minutes. I don't know if we can send you into a meeting room, into a breakout room now, but great, fantastic.
Okay, Beth, if you do want to be assigned to a breakout room, I can move you into one for 5 minutes. Great, enjoy.
We've been cat bombed.
I don't hate it.
Shush, Serge.
I mean, I was going to ask everyone to remute themselves, but maybe you keep your cat there for a little background ambience. Okay, great. So welcome back. I think we've got most of you back. So it'd be great to get a couple of little yes, what are my words today? It would be great to get a few of you to just share a little bit about what you discussed. Do we have any volunteers to go first? Just maybe share your use the reaction button to share to wave your hand. No volunteers? Come on. Was that Dan? Dan Delamotte Harrison?
One thing that we chatted about was that coronavirus allows us to value time differently. That we're used to working on the next thing, 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 which never gives you the moment to focus not only on the past and previous work, but even the present. You're not focusing on that either. You're always looking forwards to the next thing because of this turbo-capitalist structure that we live in. And actually, if we value time differently and stop seeing this kind of capitalist analogy of time equals money, where if you take time to make a decision, that means that you are ineffectual or inefficient. If we get rid of that as the status quo, we can make work in a more ethical and just way by rejecting the kind of the convenience culture, the kind of meal deal culture that we live in. Have you swiped your Nectar card? Bollocks, malarkey. Let's get rid of that and really value and pausing, and that way you make more just and ethical work.
Great response, and our conception of time is a really it is one which is very squeezed and very fast, and there are a lot of cultures. You know, Indigenous peoples are known to protect 85% of the planet's biodiversity, and you know, there's a huge thing in many Indigenous cultures around being a good ancestor and thinking about time not just as what is present in front of you right now, but 7 generations into the future, and that sort of long thinking is really important in how we think about stewardship of land and of each other as well. Yeah, I'm also really appreciating how many pets I can see right now. Does anybody else have anything to share? We've got Nina.
Hello. I had a really lovely chat with Stella and Nicola, and maybe we could share the 5 things, because I thought they were really great. Especially, I'm someone who comes from, I would say, quite a privileged background and have like sung in choirs at Cambridge, which are just uber privilege. And we came to agreement on 5 things that I think were really good, starting with celebration. As a principle, which I thought was really lovely, something we can all be proud of and not like apologizing and feeling guilty, which often happens in climate things. Secondly, inclusion and participation. Thirdly, non-judgment, like a kind of safe space for all voices. to be heard, kind of regardless of what they're saying at a certain point in time and how that might change, and people coming to their own conclusions rather than like preaching. And 4, leading into that, having a real awareness of audience and a real empathy and understanding. And then 5, imagination and like playfulness that comes with creativity. Yeah, so that was really nice.
Great, great list there. Thank you so much. And yeah, imagination is one that is something that's also often taken from us. You know, we're not given space to dream, and particularly for people who are, you know, already feeling the impacts of climate change. You know, it does often feel like you know, we're in a world which strips that imagination from us, and dreaming is important. Do we have anyone else? Alexa.
Yeah, I was just this thing that you just said, Nina, and Farah, what you added to it as well, really reminded me of a really great resource I stumbled upon online called 6 Ways to Change Hearts and Minds About Climate Change. And it's really about what you both talked about kind of like the importance of language and the storytelling and the kind of positive way that you use language to bring people into creating change rather than kind of creating fear or guilt and all that stuff. But yeah, I'm just gonna share the link in the chat if anyone's interested. It really helped me personally. It's a really good little PDF. Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much, Alexa. If anyone else has anything to share, it would be great if you carried on this conversation on Twitter and tag us and sort of share your principles online. It would be great to be able to take those forward. You know, this conversation is not meant to be for you know, kept to the confines of this Zoom link, so please do that. And I just want to point to a couple more resources before I hand back to Salome, and a couple of things for everyone to be aware of. So we at Julie's Bicycle, we've launched a series called Creative Climate Chats over lockdown, and we've talked about climate justice in a number of those chats, particularly with Ron, who did the toilet paper implosion, but also with people like Sharice Johnson, who works on climate policy, and she talks a lot about language. We've talked about our conception of the countryside with an art historian, Raj, who works on a project called Colonial Countryside, and we've spoken to Zamzam Ibrahim, who is the former NUS president, and she talks a lot about how students engage with climate change too, and creative campaigning. So they're really great resources. And you should also follow the work of the Common Ground Commission awardees for Season for Change, so you can find out more information about them on the Season for Change website, and that's all you know, very particularly focused on climate justice through working with different people and communities who are impacted differently in the UK from climate change. So thank you everyone for joining us. It was really short, but I hope that it was a useful introduction, and yeah, it's a shame that we weren't able to be joined by our guests today, but I'm sure that you'll all be able to look at their work online and see, read some beautiful nature poetry. And over to you, Salome.